I will be there for you, day or night, she said, and the time between times. That raised an eyebrow, but not my suspicions. I had blindly loved Abigail Thorp for about 6 years, and at the time, her peculiar wedding vows seemed endearing. She was only adding a little sprinkle and spice to the ceremony, as she did with all things. That was what I naively believed. Richer or poor, in sickness and in health, Abigail continued, glued or unglued. My second eyebrow raised, leveling with the first at this point. I will protect you, my fiancé said. You will be safeguarded during your resting hours. You are my world, a vessel for my love, my prosperity, my future, and I hope to be a vessel for you, a provider, an abundant source of wealth, joy, and love. I love you, Noah. Okay, I slowly replied, smiling uncertainly at Abigail's speech. Are you just trying to delay saying I do? The crowd laughed, and ever the aspiring comedian, I grinned smugly. I was oblivious to the significance of the union being forged, though. I'm ready for your vows, Noah. Abigail warmly creased my hands while looking at the vicar. Yes, the man stammered, dumbfounded by her vows. Right, Noah? I cleared my throat. What version of ChatGPT were you using? I didn't get anything like that. My fiancée rolled her eyes and shook her head. Fine, I chuckled. I'll be serious, okay? I summoned a deep breath, unmasking the clown to reveal a vulnerable man underneath. Abigail. There is no other woman quite like you, I said. From the moment that we met, I was drawn to you. The only person goofier than me. I knew that I had to marry you, if only to prove my parents that, comparatively, I'm not that weird. I heard my mother and father chortling from the front row. You are boundlessly kind, intelligent, and beautiful. My one and only love in this lifetime and any other lifetime, I continued, pausing for the obligatory utterances of gooey approval from the crowd. I love you, Abigail. And do you promise to be a vessel for my love? She pressed, fidgeting on the spot. That was the only odd question which didn't surprise me. It was a vow my fiancé had requested, actually, that we both be vessels of love for one another. Abigail had always been a poet, all teasing aside, and I've used her entire declaration as typical Abby oddity. The vessel vow was no different. It was just another unusual form of her love language. Something sort of like an innuendo, perhaps, I thought, stifling a grin. I promise to be a vessel for your love, I agreed. Once the words escaped my lips, I immediately caught a glimpse of something in Abigail's eyes, the fleeting reflection of a shadow in the corner of the church. It was the shape of a man, a misshapen man. It came with the sensation of my brain being painfully clamped, only for a moment, but long enough for me to wince. Noah? The vicar asked, noticing my brief flinch. I'm fine, I muttered, shaking my head free of the pins and needles. Abigail smiled, but it was a faux smile, not the adoring one that I'd come to know over the years. Then it's time for the declaration of intent. Do you, Noah Chapman, take Abigail Thorp to be your lawfully wedded wife? The vicar asked. I do, I said, eye twitching as I wrestled with what felt like ethereal fingernails digging into my skull. And do you, Abigail Thorp, take Noah Chapman to be your lawfully wedded husband? The vicar asked. I do. My fiancé nodded, lips bending ever upwards. Then, by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride, the vicar said. The crowd roared with applause as my mouth met Abigail's pursed lips, much like her smile, much like the entire ceremony. It was nothing like any other kiss that we'd shared. I'd never felt both warm and cold from her touch. I'd never felt that way from anything, to be honest. It was the happiest moment of my life, and yet it was clouded by trepidation, a clinging fear. But what followed was not horror. My wife and I began a whirlwind romance, a relationship deeper than the one we had prior to marrying, that swiftly flushed any doubts down the drain. The slight blip on our wedding day must have just been jitters. That's what I chose to believe anyway. A cliché one, but that's what made the most sense. The first bump in the road came like a month down the line. The topic of our living situation arose for the 100th time. From her late parents, Abigail inherited the family home and a sizable plot of land. She wanted us to move over there. I mean, understandable, of course. However, I resented the idea of her relatives viewing me as a gold digger. Her great aunts once made a chastising remark that really stuck with me. "Everyone knows the Thorp name," she huffed to Abigail. "I've got my eye on you, Chapman." The implication infuriated me. I was already financially stable before meeting Abigail. I worked as a senior software engineer. I didn't need the Thorp fortune. "The house is yours," I told my wife. "Do what you want with it, but don't feel that you need to include me. It's your inheritance. I'd rather not move into that place if at all possible." Abigail groaned. "Stop being stubborn. Noah, it's not a handout, okay? We're married. What's mine is yours." "Well, what about Chris?" I pointed out. "Isn't he interested in it? Does he not resent your parents for leaving the entire estate to you?" He inherited a sizable sum of money. The yacht and the lake house," Abigail said. "My brother received just as much wealth as me." "Does he see it that way?" I asked. "After all, we are talking about Thorp Manor. That's your family's heritage." "Heritage? Oh, please. Chris only cares about money," my wife laughed. "You need to get over this, Noah. Nobody's going to despise you for living in that house with me. Forget my great-aunt Gertrude. She's a bitter old woman. An aunt, might I add, whom my mother hated." Arguing with Abigail was like chewing a skirt steak. It was tough, and it ended with a jaw ache. Naturally, I ended up buckling and agreeing to move into Thorp Manor. I mean, in fairness, Abigail was right. I was being stubborn. I admit my flaws. Pride is one of them. In truth, I did want to move there. The property was one of unbeatable splendor, and I was secretly jubilant at the prospect of living in a manor. Marital bliss resumed. All seemed well for the following few months. Better than ever before, as I said. I forgot all about the argument and the strangeness of our wedding day. And then came the migraines. Much like the day of the ceremony, electric shocks filled my head. Brain zaps. They flared up during the mornings, mostly, but the dull pain sometimes persisted throughout the day. And there were other health issues. No matter how much I slept, I was perpetually fatigued, hazy-brained, living life on standby mode as it felt. It felt like I were lugging a plumper brain around to the detriment of my thinking ability. And that was strange, as I had never been the type to feel excessively tired. I was a night owl, but suddenly, I seemed unable to stay awake past 10 in the evening, and nothing noticeable in my lifestyle had changed at all. "Are you okay, sweetie?" Abigail asked. I sighed heavily. I feel tired," my wife finished. "Lie down for a little while, honey. I'm cooking dinner tonight." "No," I said. Don't do it. Don't you have to prepare for that presentation in the morning?" I asked. But Abigail shushed me, and I thanked her, giving her a tight squeeze. Then, I waddled dozily into the manor's spacious lounge, picking one of the 3 sofas to rest my weary, weighted head. I slumped onto a cushion, and my body tumbled immediately into the land of Nod. But my dreams were feverish. The eccentric, surreal nightmares of a body running on fumes. When the body viciously reboots itself after countless sleepless nights, the mind runs wild. And this wasn't my first fever dream since moving here. Just as it wasn't the first time that I'd seen the man in the corner of my sleep-fueled visions. The man with gray eyes and no other features on his face. I woke from my nap around 6:30 in the evening. I'm sure I would have slept through until dinner was ready, but the sound of an agitated conversation disrupted my rest. "You need to leave," Abigail urged. "It's far too early for you to be—" "He's asleep," a man's voice interrupted. "Let's do it now. I'm growing impatient." "No, Dinner's nearly ready, my wife huffed. He'll be waking up soon. It'll be time later. Ugh, fine, a woman grunted. At the midpoint, then. At the midpoint, Abigail said. I squeezed my eyelids together, body trembling as I tried to decipher the coded conversation. I was racking my brain to pinpoint these voices. I was distracted during dinner. I wanted to confront Abigail about the mysterious visitors who left before I pretended to wake up. Of course, she would have known that I've been eavesdropping, and something about the nature of their talk set me on the back foot. I felt exposed. Abigail had never made me feel exposed before. When we finally went to bed, I stayed awake with my eyes firmly shut. I anxiously waited whatever scheme Abigail and her unknown accomplice had in store. I channeled my inner night owl. I wasn't too worried about nodding off. Nerves would keep me awake, I decided, as would the thunderstorm which brewed outside. However, I was baffled to be awoken by my alarm clock at around 7 in the morning. I failed to resist the pull of sleep, and the sinister connotations of that fact were starting to dawn on me. The exhaustion, the excruciating headaches, the strangers in our home, something was uneven, and on this particular morning there was something else. The legs of my joggers were dirty and sodden. Have I been sleepwalking outside? I wondered. I wasn't convinced, so I resisted the urge to mention anything to Abigail. It was all connected, somehow. My wife had something to do with it, and I devised a way to find answers. I would film myself, see whether I'd been giving up in the middle of the night, going for strolls maybe, repeatedly bludgeoning my head against a wall perhaps. There had to be a logical explanation for everything, even the conversation. You might have misinterpreted or misheard them, I suggested to myself, or, better yet, it might have just been a dream. With renewed confidence, I crossed my fingers that the video footage would clear up everything. After setting up the camera, I went to bed with a giddiness in my gut. I longed to wake and finally have some answers. Unfortunately, the next day, there were no damp patches or grubby stains on my clothes, and the video recording revealed that I'd slept through the night. Over the following days, this continued to be the case. I was starting to lose faith until Chris came to stay. Much to my annoyance, Abigail's drunken brother, upon arriving to our manor, collapsed on the sofa. He won a sizable sum of money from gambling and immediately splurged it all in a 2-day bender. It wasn't the first time that he'd earned and blown a lot of wealth. Is this gonna be a reoccurring thing? I sighed. My wife shrugged. He's an addict, Noah. We have to support him. I mean, he's working on it. Well, maybe he's also a sociopath, I said, and he's never had to account for his own actions. Abigail pouted. Look, he's still my brother. Besides, he actually came here to clear his head. Right, I nodded, disbelievingly, rubbing my own pounding forehead. Speaking of which, the migraines are back. I'm going to bed. Okay, sweetie, my wife said, planting a kiss on my sore brow. Good night. The next morning, I woke up to that familiar feeling of disorientation, and for the first time, I was glad about it. I knew exactly what it meant. I rushed to my computer, uploaded the footage from the hidden camera, and fast-forwarded through the events of the prior night. What the... I began. At midnight, Abigail's eyes opened fully. She laid on her back, as stiff as a plank, as if she'd never really been asleep, as if she were hardly human, for that matter. My wife rose like a machine, and her stiff limbs carried her to the bedroom door. When she opened it, Chris entered. Is it time? Is he ready? My brother-in-law asked. Abigail nodded. Good, the man replied before clearing his throat. At the midpoint, you unglue. In a blur of motion, too fast for me to even really track, something awful happened. My body split in two. Abigail and Chris watched silently as my sleepwalking form rose from the bed, unbinding itself from the black, shadowy shape of a body left on the bed. My real-life jaw fell as I watched my wife and brother-in-law walk out of the room, followed by my zombified body. And left behind, there was only a black spectral atop the bed, a shadow that had my vague shape. It was a vibrating energy with my outline rigidly frozen in place. Hyperventilating, my mind crippled by existential dread, I shivered in front of the computer screen watching an unmoving recording of some terrifying spirit. After half an hour, Abigail and Chris returned, followed seconds by my shambling, lifeless shell. "Are you satisfied?" my wife asked Chris. "Never," her brother coldly replied. "Are you?" "Yes," my wife said, tucking my body back into bed. It lay atop the black spirit thing. "Then why do you do the same?" Chris asked, offering a wicked smile. Abigail ignored him. "I am a vessel for your love. Your glue." With those words, the dark spectral reunited with my body. Skin absorbed the blackened form. A second later, after rebinding, my recorded self started snoozing loudly. "I love him," my wife said. "You love what he can give you," my brother-in-law taunted. "Good night, Abby." After her brother left the room, Abigail stood in silence for several minutes. She stared at the wall, panting heavily. I don't really know what she felt. There was rage, sadness, or frustration, maybe. All I know is that her breathing suddenly slowed until she looked entirely peaceful and serene. And then her head cracked to the side, facing the filming camera. "Fuck!" I cried, falling off of my desk chair. And as I climbed to my feet, my eyes were drawn to the shape of the office's doorway. Abigail was home. "I've been waiting for you to wake up," she sighed. "Noah, I can explain—" "What the fuck, Abigail?" I screamed. "What the fucking fuck?" "I didn't know how to tell— I'm leaving!" I cried, charging towards the stranger in the doorway. "Day or night, heed your vow," she whispered. In a surge of excruciating agony, I felt my body tear in two, and by the time that I realized that, I was left staring at my own physical form. It stood there before me like a statue. I was a disembodied spirit, enduring a terrifying out-of-body experience. "Don't worry," Abigail said, leaving my frozen spirit behind as she led my physical shell out of the room. "I'll fix you." As my wife and my body exited the room, the colors of reality swirled around me, and I stumbled into a liminal landscape of brimstone and hellfire. Strangely enough, I recognized it. Something stirred in my memory bank. I'd been to that place before, numerous times. Every single time the Thorp split my soul from its vessel, and when I awoke, I forgot. I was left with nothing but a pounding head and a lot of questions. I decided that this time would be different. "Hello?" I cried. I wandered through the arid abyss, tentatively peering around rocky mounds and sidestepping trickling streams of fire or lava or whatever otherworldly substance blazed in that wasteland. The sky above was black, but it was not filled with stars. It was just an infinite emptiness. Not a sky at all. It wasn't anything. After what could have been an hour or a minute of wandering through nothingness, I eventually abandoned my mission and resigned myself to Abigail's fate. With a deep sigh, I turned my head and prepared to head back, but my feet failed me. Following at a distance for no more than 10 yards was a looming, gangly figure, a man with limbs like those of a human, but there was nothing about him that was from our world. He was built of loose and peeling flesh, revealing mounds of black, beating mush beneath the surface of his skin, and as a flare of otherworldly lava lit the air, it illuminated patches of fur on his body. Much like the man of my nightmares, he bore 2 gray eyes and no further features on his terrifying face.
"You return to the place between, Noah Chapman,"
the being lowly noted, speaking from all directions. I shuddered, stumbling backwards.
"And yet again, you have forgotten my face,"
he said, tilting his horrid head to the side, eagerly viewing me.
"Perhaps if I wear your lovely skin, you might recognize me."
The creature took a silent step towards me, and I wondered whether or not it had been soundlessly pursuing me the entire time that I'd been in this ungodly land. Terrified of the impossibility before me, I stepped backwards, but the being was nimble, large, omnipotent in this realm, and I had no doubt of that. "What do you want?" I asked.
No,
He replied, inching ever closer.
you should be asking what they want.
I panted fearfully, retreating slowly from the approaching abhorrence, its eyes glistening a muted gray, swirling in endless whirlpools that threatened to consume me. What have they done to me?" I asked. "Where am I?"
Better questions.
The creature replied.
They tied you to Abigail, and they're using you. As for this realm, you're in the place between places.
It dawned in my head frightfully. "Wait, using me for what?"
To claim your rewards.
He hissed.
No soul can overstep the border and enter my prison, but a soulless body safely walks the fire. It can do their bidding.
"But I have a soul. I'm here," I pointed it out.
This isn't my prison.
It replied.
This isn't anywhere. Neither of us are really here because there is no here.
"What do you mean?" I cried.
You always ask that question. I'm tired of explaining this.
It growled.
I am Timnor, and I offer gifts to those who sustain me. Noah Chapman, the hovel by the lake. That this is the place in which I have dwelled for 50 rounds of the sun. The Thorps imprisoned me, and now they feed me. You are my feast.
You made a deal with the Thorps? I asked.
I must survive,
Timnor answered.
I cannot live in a cage. The Thorps bring me your soulless body. They unglue your spirit from it, bringing me an empty husk, a shell through which I can walk the mortal world for half an hour at the midpoint. And in return, I give them whatever they desire. One gift per visit.
You've possessed me? I whispered.
People cannot be possessed, Noah Chapman.
Timnor explained.
You are not your body.
I grasped fearfully, and an unthinkable question spilled out of my mouth. What would you make a deal with me? The terrifying being suddenly stopped taking strides towards me. He surveyed me with great interest, crinkling his featureless face in a way that almost had the appearance of a dareful smile.
You have never asked that before, Noah Chapman.
It replied.
What manner of deal?
I stammered, searching for the words. I want freedom from the Thorps. Freedom from you. Freedom from this place. All of it.
And in return,
it asked.
If not your body, I require something else.
I gulped. I don't have the stomach to sacrifice another human for you. Even a cruel one.
Oakwood?
Timnor said. I paused. Oakwood?
Yes.
It continued.
The Thorps denied my request. I don't need much. Just a taste.
Why? I cautiously asked.
It will unbind me from my prison,
Timnor said.
And they do not wish to unbind me. They need me endlessly again and again for their selfish desires.
I won't imprison you, I replied. I only need one thing from you.
We need the same thing, it seems. Freedom. Such sickly poetry.
I am curious, however. Why haven't you ever fetched Oakwood for yourself? I asked. You've used my body as a vessel to leave your hovel on numerous occasions.
I am bound by rules.
The being hissed.
Do we have a deal, Noah Chapman?
Yes. When I forget this? As we speak, Abigail's taking my body to the lake.
Yes,
Timnor said.
I sense her nearing. I shall have to leave this purgatory, and as she always does, she will ask that I make you forget. Will you bring me the oak wood if I lie?
I shuddered and nodded.
By the midpoint.
It continued. I nodded again.
Very well.
Timnor growled.
I will ensure that you remember.
I screamed as my soul was swept away by a swirl of blackness, in which the horrifying entity merged with its surroundings. After an eternal plummet, I felt grounded, physical and real, and I realized that the blackness was, in fact, the inside of my eyelids. When I opened them, my soul had returned to its body. I was back in the real world, lying in bed, in real time, not the one in between. "Good morning," a preppy voice called, startling me. I turned to face the en-suite door, and my wife was beaming at me with a toothbrush in her mouth. She asked Timnor to wipe my mind, and I had to play along with that notion. It took a tremendous amount of willpower, but I smiled. "Morning," I croakily replied. "Well, afternoon, actually," my wife chuckled. How's your head feeling? Better now that you've slept it off?" Strangely, I did feel better. I wondered whether Timnor's induced amnesia had given me the migraines. I also realized that it was the same day. Hours had passed, but Abigail was simply pretending that nothing had happened. And when I looked at the hiding spot on the nearby shelf, I noticed that my camera wasn't there. She asked him to make me forget about filming myself too, I realized. "What do you want to do today?" Abigail asked. "It is the weekend, at long last." "Yeah, well, firstly, I'm gonna take my morning walk," I responded quickly. My wife frowned slightly, but her face quickly eased, and she nodded. Fortunately, I did like to stroll around the property every morning, so there was nothing out of the ordinary about that. What had clearly aroused her suspicion, though, was the fact that my voice had been filled with such urgency. Before Abigail had the opportunity to piece anything together, though, I was already out of the house, and I beelined straight for the car. I knew of a nearby road lined with oak trees, and all Trimmer needed was a sliver of wood, the smallest amount, and he would be free. I would be free. And as I pulled down the driveway, I took a quick glance in my rearview mirror. "Shit," I whispered, flooring the pedal. She knew that I was lying. She could read my face, and I knew that she was smart enough to figure out what that meant. But it was fine. I got away. In fact, I shouldn't ever return, I thought. She can have my body if I run.
"Oh, but she can,"
Timnor's unmistakable voice whispered.
"Wherever you go, she can summon your vessel at the midpoint."
I shrieked fearfully at the situation of the sound in my head, and my eyes were drawn to the property's passing lake. It lay just beyond a small cluster of trees, a small forest, and my body drained with all the warmth when I spotted a lurking shape in the pines. A long-limbed, gray-eyed, and not quite human form. Casting my eyes back to the road, I floored the accelerator and slipped through the mansion's main gate. As I drove along the road of trees that I had in mind, my mind raced with the possibilities of what my treacherous wife might be doing to reclaim control of my body. After mounding a grassy bank at the foot of some oaks, I retrieved a penknife from the glove compartment. I was thankful that we had been recently on a camping trip, and I flew out of the car, scrambling up the hill to reach the nearest tree, and with a swift flick of my tool, I had shaved a thin layer of wood from a mighty oak beside the road. I did not hesitate to jump back into the car and head home. When I returned, however, the atmosphere of the manor felt different. I trundled tentatively through the main gates and dreaded what I might find at the lake. Abigail and Chris armed to the teeth, ready to massacre me on the spot. But somehow finding nothing was worse. I didn't know what my wife might be planning. I drove onto the grass, heading towards the trees which formed a barrier between the property and the lake. That's when I saw them. 4 figures standing in a small clearing before the water. Wait, is that Mr. and Mrs. Thorp? I had wondered. Now, how on earth the matriarch and the patriarch of the family had returned to life, I did not know. But they were watching my car hesitantly approach.
They're going to take you,
Timnor whispered in my mind. Petrified, I felt the yank of my body splitting from my soul, and I brought the car to a halt. And I watched as my mindless vessel of a body clambered out of the vehicle, walking across the grass towards that demented family waiting by the lake, waiting by Timnor's prison. Reality swirled once more, throwing me into the place between places, the nightmarish, darkened world of lava and terror. The horrifying being spoke between 2 rock faces.
You failed, Noah Chapman, and now they have claimed you as a vessel once more.
So, is my body in your prison? I asked. The being paused.
Yes. I am about to utilize your vessel to...
The front pocket of my coat, I whispered. Timnor's eyes glazed as if he were viewing something in the real world.
Oh, quite. I see. Your contract will be nullified, Noah Chapman. By the power vested in me, I unbind you from Abigail Chapman. I unbind you from the Thorps.
And as the world around me collapsed, so too did my spirit. It stretched into the endless abyss of blackness above me, and I awoke on my knees in a dirt clearing by the lake, surrounded by a small cluster of trees that the Thorps called a forest. Beneath me, there lay a downward, muddy slope, concealed by shrubbery and trees. The place had been Timnor's jail for an untold amount of time. Before me, I saw the line which marked the edge of his domain. But I was within it. No soul can step within my prison. But I wasn't burning alive. I could tread across his land. It was no longer his prison. I had freedom. I ran through the trees, ignoring the early evening sun that slipped behind the Thorp Manor. I was free, spiritually, but I had to free myself of that wretched family physically. I jumped in my car, still sitting with the open driver's door on the grass. But it wasn't the only car around. 100 yards towards the house, Chris's Ford GT was crumbled like paper in the front wall of the Thorp Manor. I wanted to escape, but I had to know. Had to be certain. I drove back to the property, getting out of the vehicle and lighting my way with my phone torch. And there, sitting in a bloody mess behind the wheel, was Abigail's baby brother, Chris Thorp, flattened like a revolting omelet between the mangled seat and the bonnet. Well, what was left of the bonnet. His beloved car, one of the gifts that Timnor had no doubt given him. Shaking, I found my feet moving towards the front door. I entered the well-lit property on janky legs and found a scene of utter chaos. Overturned furnishings, scratches on the walls, and demolished decor. In the living room, I found 2 people that I never expected to see again. 2 people I scarcely believed that I'd even seen earlier. Miranda and Harold, the late Thorp parents. They had once more become lifeless corpses. Harold lay on his back, belly bulging, and his eyes were bloodshot. Gold medallions were spilling out of his mouth. As I leaned more closely, eyes on the edge of a particularly blood-stained right eye, I caught sight of what seemed to be a rotund shape squeezing into his eye socket. His entire body had been filled to the brim with coins, the wealth that he no doubt acquired through sordid means. And Miranda lay beside him, her body compressed into a gut-spilling mess. She'd been constricted by the lavish dress that she wore, a dress stained red, and somehow not torn at the seams. It had torn her at the seams. Abigail, I muttered. She was the real reason that I returned. In spite of the horror she and her family had inflicted upon me, I still loved the woman. I still had to know what became of her. Timnor had slaughtered the others. I knew he wouldn't have spared her. And when I reached our upstairs bedroom, my suspicions were confirmed. However, the scene was not what I expected. My wife was still alive, but horribly so. In our bed, Abigail lay in a wheezing state. She had aged beyond the years of any mortal being, aged beyond comprehension, and to the extent that it seemed cruel for Timnor to even keep her alive, a punishment worse than anything that the others had experienced.
No.
My wife whispered, struggling to breathe with withered lungs and a crumbling body. When I walked to Abigail's bedside, I was scarcely brave enough to even touch her, fearing that she might become an ashy mound in my fingers. "Why did you do this?" I asked. My wife tearfully mumbled.
I didn't wish for cruel things, Noah. You have to...
"You did a monstrous thing to me," I interrupted. "You stole my body, my soul, made me a pawn that you could throw into the lion's den."
Money that my dad spent poorly. Pretty things that turned my mom cold and callous. Successful investments that Chris squandered on hedonism and cruelty to others, she coughed. But I only wanted to bring them back. Mom and Dad. And then I wanted you to love me forever. I wanted us to be together forever. I wanted you to love me unconditionally. I was greedy too. This is his punishment. Killing me with age and heartbreak.
"That's a lot of wants, Abigail," I whispered bitterly, "and they came at the expense of me."
No, it wasn't going to hurt you,
Abigail whispered, eyes fading. "Look what it did to all of you," I said. "I only pray it upholds its end of the bargain." My wife's eyes widened.
What did you say? Bargain?
Did you strike a deal with Timnor? Did you free it?" She gasped nearly soundlessly, barely clutching to life. I nodded. "After you imprisoned him."
Imprisoned him?
Abigail shuddered.
Is that what he told you?
"We found him, Noah, locked away in the hovel. Somebody put him there a long time ago, and for good reason." "You? Somebody else? I don't really care, Abigail," I sighed. This was the only way to free myself. My wife produced a single tear, all she had left to give. "May something have mercy on your soul, Noah. For there's certainly no God left. This is Timnor's domain now." As my wife faded into a pit of emptiness we all find at the end of the road, I reflected on her dying words. What use would there be in lying to me now? Over the many weeks following her death, I kept wondering what she meant. Should I have not freed Timnor? I know what he craved within his prison, but what could he possibly crave beyond it?